Today's September 11th,
Didn't say he wasn't going to be here today.
and I want to just make a very quick mention that on 9/11, this country got attacked and a lot of innocent people died, and we should never forget that. That's my position and my opinion. If you don't like it, I don't care. But anyways, second thing is, we have been blessed over the last couple of years of getting what I would call exceptional coverage in the local newspaper of what we're doing and making sense out of some of the ramblings of this committee. So Noelle is moving on to the National Public Radio. And she's done a huge job. And we thank you for being a member of the Fourth Estate and being accurate and clear and concise. So thank you. The last thing I'm going to say, because we're on TV and everything else, is a number of people, nobody in this room, by the way, but a number of people external of this have been starting to sort of reach out with what I would call individual requests about individual parcels. And that's not the goal or the purpose of this committee or our staff to give people one-on-one answers about their individual parcels. So for anybody that's watching or picks us up online or whatever, we do post everything we do on a web page, and it is there. But we are an advisory board. We're not a decision-making board. So to the extent that somebody who's got a piece of land or a parcel or a development wants an opinion, we're not in the position to do that because we are not the zoning board, we're not the planning board, we're not the board of selectmen, we're not the board of health. So I just wanted to cover that because it's with the whole IA and the geo boundaries, it's starting to build a little bit of momentum, okay? First item on the agenda is a continued discussion on the recommendation to the town manager's office and IA subsidy. And was it today? I think it was today. Today we received, and I'm an optimist, today we received an opinion from the assistant town manager's office who has been consulting with the town council about whether or not subsidies can be offered to individual homeowners for issues that involve their property. It turns out there's an awful lot of state regulations relative to this. We will need to get our ducks in order, and we will need to go get in a special act of the state legislature at some point if we march on that path. But I am not going to stop the discussion on the issue of fairness and whether or not people that are told they have to put an IA in should or should not be entitled to some subsidy, and then how we get to that subsidy and whether we have to go through the state legislature, because state law right now says you can't enhance an individual property owner. We will work through that. And I think all the board members received a copy of that correspondence from the assistant town manager. So I found it clarifying. Is there no mountain too high to climb? But this is just another hill to get over, okay? Now, I forgot who's first. Was Jonathan going to talk about, should we get to the subsidy things, how we can work on a sliding scale? And Jonathan, is this your first time at the lectern?
Pardon?
Is this your first presentation?
Yes.
All right, go easy on him, everybody. Go easy. He's a newbie.
Use the arrows quick.
All right, John Kaufman, Water Quality Management Committee board member. So for the past 2 to 3 months, the board has been discussing the issues of subsidies, whether to give them how much for people who are mandated by the town to put in an IA system to be in compliance with the watershed management plans. When I looked at this, and I saw that in the past, models have been proposed that used a constant subsidy value, a percentage, and then I looked into the tax credit issues. It seemed to me that the folks who are making less money are paying a larger burden of the cost relative to those folks who qualify for the full tax burden. And that's kind of the essence of my presentation, to show is there a way we could do this a little bit more equitably with a different system, which I'll call the sliding scale system for subsidies for IA systems. And as Steve mentioned, the whole issue of subsidies for IAs is now, thrown into a bit of a tumble, and I'm hopeful that we can work this out, because I think it's an important component that a lot of homeowners will need to help afford a system that they're going to be mandated to do. And we have to keep in mind the scale. There's approximately 6,500 residential parcels out of the 20 or so in Falmouth that are in the geo boundaries slated to be an IA district. So we're not talking a small component. We're talking 30% of the houses in Falmouth that would have to put these systems in. All right, so what is the rationale? Well, I think it's really about equitable distribution of costs for these systems. And right now, with the state tax code and using Form SC for the state septic tax credit, you can get a maximum of $18,000 as long as you make over a certain amount of income. In this case, it's about $80,000. In that case, you'll qualify for the full $4,000 a year tax credit. And as your taxable income after exemptions, deductions drops below $80,000, you'll get a smaller and smaller tax credit, right? So right away you can see that those who make the most money are going to get the biggest tax credit. And that obviously offsets the total cost of the system. So what is a better way to do this? What can we think about for the people who are making below $80,000, who are most challenged economically, but are being asked to burden a higher percentage of the cost per a unit of an IA system? And so I think we can change the way we look at it from a fixed percentage to a sliding scale percentage, and I'll show some charts and tables that'll illustrate that. And just to sort of cement this point further, when you look at the census data, I think about 90 or 50% of the median home incomes are below 90,000. So when you factor in some of the deductions, that means that a lot of people are not going to qualify for the full tax credit, and they'll get some smaller amount. So the sliding scale is one way to look at this to maybe change the calculus of this. So basically, it's a system that's pretty simple. We're going to say that the subsidy is inversely proportional to the amount of the septic tax credit. So simply stated, if you apply and get the full $4,000 a year credit, the town subsidy would be zero or some lower amount. I'm using zero for this case study. And as you go to no tax credit, the town would subsidize costs to 50%. So what that results in an example case here, where let's say the IA system costs $40,000 per home, the net cost to the homeowners will be about $20,000 across the board. And we'll see that that's very different than when we use a fixed subsidy model. The cost to the town will vary from 0 to 20,000 depending on the proportion of homes that get some subsidy versus some that get none. But the bottom line is it will save the town money relative to the cost of just using a constant, let's say 30% or 25% value for that credit or for that subsidy. I think it's pretty straightforward. You can see as the numbers change, as the annual septic tax credit goes down, the subsidy goes up. So this table shows what we're trying to fix here. So in the shaded blue part of the table on the right side, the fixed town subsidy in this model, I'm going to say it's 25%. It could be any number you want to choose. I'm saying the cost is $40,000. So that results in all homeowners getting $10,000 as a subsidy. And then when you factor in the tax credit for people who earn the full $18,000 tax credit, they're getting $18,000 plus $10,000 subsidy, so the net cost to that homeowner is $12,000 to install the IA system. For folks who are on the opposite spectrum, who don't qualify for the tax credit, they're not getting the $18,000 offset, so they're shouldering the full burden minus the $10,000 subsidy, so they're paying more. And then obviously it'll change as you get some amount of tax credit, your burden changes. Now with the sliding scale model, which I showed previously, folks who are, have no income, no tax credit, they're going to get 50% subsidy. The cost to them is going to be $20,000. If you get a $10,000 credit, tax credit, the cost to you will still, to the homeowner is still $20,000. The town will only pay $10,000 of that. And then if it's an $18,000 tax credit that you qualify for basically the full amount, then you're not getting any subsidy, but still your net cost is more or less the same as the other homeowners. So in this system, everybody who has to put an IA system will now pay roughly the same amount. In the previous, or in a fixed subsidy model, there's tremendous inequity between the net cost to the homeowner based on whether you qualify for the tax credit and how much you get. Pretty straightforward, I think. So, some things to consider here. Who qualifies for the septic tax credit? Basically, owners of residential properties in Massachusetts, and they occupy that property as their principal residence. Who doesn't qualify? Well, non-residents, secondary income-generating homes, things like Airbnbs, those sorts of places, and residents who voluntarily replace or repair their septic system or just add an IA system because they want to do the right thing. And unless you can get an engineer, I think, to declare that your system has failed in some way, you would not qualify for this system. So the issues that need to be discussed really are what happens to folks who have the short-term rentals? How are they treated? The same, differently? What about the recreational, seasonal, occasional homeowners? And that's not a small number. That's about 7,000 homes. How do they get, do they qualify for this? To what extent? All these are points that need to be discussed, and we need to think about these. And then finally, can this model be applied in the case of sewering, which is not as controversial in terms of the subsidies? I think it's considered legal because it's not on private property. Can we do the same thing where we use a scale that allows folks who don't get as much of the septic credit as others to somehow reap a higher amount of subsidy to equate the number of the value that they're going to have to pay for their improvement for the quality of the water for everybody? So that's really my system. It's straightforward, simple, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Jonathan, thank you for putting your intelligence to work and giving us another paradigm to consider on how to get to equality for this whole system. I'm going to open it up to questions. I'll start. Jonathan's not here. He's up at the podium, so I'll start with you, Tom.
No, I don't have any.
Steve?
Would it also work and save the town even more money if we were able to convince, as you heard Steve say before, we probably have to go to the state legislature to get some kind of ability to subsidize at all. If the same bill, if it was politically feasible, if you simply made the tax credit refundable as opposed to the non-refundable that it is now, then it would no longer be a function of income. Because I don't know, maybe not everybody here knows the difference between a refundable and a non-refundable tax credit, but a non-refundable one, you have to subtract it from income tax that you owe the state. A refundable one means they owe you that money. If you also owe them the same amount of money, it's a wash. If you owe them nothing, it's a gift to you. If you owe them twice as much, then you pay half as much, so on.
I mean, anything that helps alleviate the burden on homeowners who are in income challenge settings is a good idea.
It would cost the state more money. It would cost the town less money, but it would avoid having the town looking at everybody's income tax returns, which a lot of people would not like.
Yeah. I mean, I think these discussions need to happen, and the best system
but I think it's a great idea.
What the accountants and lawyers come up with, that's obviously, I'm a geologist, not an economist, so I'm not well positioned to talk about how to best enact it, but I think the simple principle of it makes a lot of sense to me.
Ed?
I think, great job, great presentation, Jonathan, a lot of good thought and very clear I think it's an elegant potential way to approach this. Things to consider is, the average sale price of a house in Falmouth now is probably between $600,000 and $800,000. If we look at the cost of an IA as a percentage of that, it's small. Another point is that no other towns do a subsidy. None. There is a limited pot of grant money that's being used in Tisbury on the Vineyard, and they have their mandate in place now affecting 1,500 homes. And that's it. When that money's gone, I don't know what they're going to do, and I don't know how they would attempt to address the fact that, well, first come guys got some subsidy, but nobody else can. So there's, an issue there. But no other town that I am aware of does this. It's a dangerous precedent. I think part of the qualifying incomes on earners, and you've got some great stats there and data, but the average income, I think, includes all earners in the community, not just homeowners. And I suspect that the average income of homeowners in Falmouth is much higher than the number you showed. There are a number of senior citizens, low-income people that have a house that they might have inherited or had purchased 20, 30 years ago when prices were, excuse me, much more reasonable. But I think that's a relatively smaller number than what you were showing, the actual average income of people who own a home, thereby qualifying for the state tax credit. And in this case, I'll refer to that state tax credit as a subsidy. So I think it's a very creative solution, very well presented. And as you said, there are a ton of questions in this. We've spent a lot of hours as a committee batting this whole concept around, both in meetings and I'm sure outside of meetings in our own research online and just thinking about it. A key thing for this also that determines when that requirement for an IA hits your wallet is when do you trigger the mandate? Various towns, and I think, Kristen, some months ago you had a summary of the triggers that various towns are using for IAs. I couldn't find it as I went back through old notes, but that might be something you could send out again because it shows what other communities are doing. Our good friend and frequent visitor from the Buzzards Bay Coalition says, why the hell in plain English aren't you guys doing mandates for new construction? And I agree wholeheartedly, because that's a key trigger. If new construction is going on, you're typically talking close to $1 million investment between the tear down construction or if it's on vacant land. You're still investing that kind of money. And at that point, the cost of an IA, additional $22,000, $25,000 for the IA tank versus a traditional Title V, is a drop in the bucket on $1 million project, that order of magnitude. So when you trigger the mandate is key to the discussion, I know, and I know our chair has wanted to defer the discussion of triggers, but I think it's so critical to what we're talking about that we should include it. When do you have to do this? New construction seems like a no-brainer. The cost, the equity really doesn't become a factor at that point. Somebody that's making less than $80,000 isn't building $1 million home and doing that kind of project. Another trigger that communities use, not all but some, is expansion. Adding a bedroom, expansion of use, additional consumption. You need a bigger septic system, thou shalt put in the IA. That's a trigger that's very common. Sale of property is a common trigger, but again, not all communities that have a mandate do sale of property. When a property is sold in Falmouth, the average sale price is probably over $1 million now, actual sale price. If you look at the real estate report in the paper or go on Banker and Tradesman that comes out every week, and you'll see people are buying a house in Falmouth, and even something very small and modest, $700,000, $800,000 on up. At that juncture, if your trigger is sale of property, again, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not impacting the low wage earner, It's another whole problem in Falmouth and all over the Cape of the affordability of houses. But that's not part of the discussion. It's not relevant. We're talking about when do you mandate the IA. So those triggers are key, I think, to the discussion because it's all about the timing. If a family has a house they've had for years and they keep it for the next several generations and it's in a trust, it's never changing title. You don't hit that trigger unless you expand it, tear it down. So that I think we need to consider as part of this discussion. The swamp that getting into special legislation, getting into checking people's income to see if they qualify for a subsidy. Gee, we're gonna have to see your income tax. You know, you're gonna have to create a whole new town accounting department to manage that.
So Ed, are you proposing that all new construction in Falmouth has to have an IA?
Yes.
All?
Yep.
Whether it's in a nitrogen-sensitive zone or not?
I think that makes sense, because we don't know, the end game for this committee and for this community is to improve the estuaries, to reverse the damage that has been done over the last 100 years.
How many new homes go in every year?
It's a relatively small number.
Okay, but you want to pick that off now?
Take the low-hanging fruit.
You want to pick that off now?
Yes.
For any new construction?
New construction or
Put an
expansion
IA.
of use.
Do you want to make a motion that this board recommend to the selectmen that any new construction shall have an IA system?
So moved.
Well, it needs much more discussion before I would
We
vote
can
for it.
second it for discussion, or,
Yeah, but I don't think that discussion is proper for this meeting right now.
yeah,
It's a-
that
it's a
probably
little
should be an
ahead.
agenda item.
But it would be a
I'll
good
withdraw my
agenda
motion.
item. It would
Okay.
definitely be a good agenda item.
You know, I think we need to start talking about the triggers.
We do, but I would say this, we're getting close to having the geo-boundaries defined.
Yes.
Once we have the geo-boundaries defined, now it's off to the Board of Health, in which we identify the triggers for how soon somebody inside the geo-boundaries has to do something, okay? And, you know, it would be nice to have that in place now on some of those triggers, but
Steve?
Just in the past couple of
Jonathan,
weeks.
you can sit down, because we're not talking about subsidies.
Just, I'm almost done.
We're
But
we're going a little sideways, but it's okay.
Just
I'll
in the
allow it.
last couple of weeks, 2 houses are going before Concom, or have gone before Concom. One is to replace a cesspool, I think it was on Shorewood, which is in one of those zones that we're really worried about.
You're on Shorewood, aren't you?
I am?
And another one on Bourne's Pond. So there are houses replacing systems, and they're saying, well, I got a failed cesspool, and I'm on Shorewood, and I'm going to put in a Title V. Ludicrous. Ludicrous. Now, I'm on Bourne's Pond. I got a Title V, or I got a septic system, but I'm going to replace it with a new Title V. That's the time to put in the IA.
So I'm willing, if the rest of the board wants to do this, I'm willing to suspend everything on geo-boundaries and put together a proposal to take to the Board of Health, for the Board of Health to say that any new construction inside the entire town of Falmouth shall put in an IA system. Is that what this board wants to do?
Well, you know, we don't have to, I think that can be done concurrent with the continued finish up the geo-boundaries, but open that dialogue with the Board of Health. We've talked about having some joint meetings, and I think that discussion can be going on concurrent to finish up the geo-boundaries, but let's not do that and then spend another 6 months coming up with our triggers.
Kristen, would you reach out to the Board of Health and see if they want to have a joint meeting, to have a conversation relative to any new construction in the town of Falmouth shall require an IA? Is that going to satisfy you?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. Let's see where that one goes. Go ahead, Steve.
Ed, your idea makes sense, but I have a suggested piece of homework for you. Find out the rate of turnover of construction plus sales, and what fraction, and find out from Steve or Kristen what the deadline is for getting this done to all the houses. Look, 20 years, 30, 40, I don't know. How many would be done in that time period? And then how many are left that are going to have to be mandated by some other trigger? Does that make sense? Obviously, you don't have to do anything I say, but
Yeah,
does it make sense that somebody looks up that data?
That's going to be a real hard one to pin down. The turnover is a dwindling number because people aren't putting stuff on the market. But when
But
it
the
doesn't-
real estate, you call some real estate agent, they give you a ballpark figure, which is all I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, if it turns out that at that turnover rate, it's going to take 60 years, then you know that what you're proposing is a good but partial solution.
Oh, it's not, yeah, it's a
And so you
start.
also need another solution that involves mandates based on the clock or the calendar.
Yep,
And as John pointed out at another meeting, this is like a Manhattan Project, and based on what Kristen's about to tell us, there are, 7,700 properties. Round off, divide that by 365 days a year, including Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays, and see how many years it takes to do 7,700 IAs if you do one a day. All the contractors combined, they finish one a day, rolls off the assembly line. Doesn't mean they have to do it in a day, but they have to finish a new one every day. It turns out it's about 20 years.
right, for just that one town. And there's other towns
Right,
doing it.
right.
Tisbury's got
So-
1,500, Mashpee, I'm
So
looking to
I
get a number from them
apologize
of how
for
many.
digressing
So
from your topic.
It's a
but-
huge thing, so how do you eat an elephant? You take a bite.
I'd
Start.
cook it first.
Steve, can I comment? So, I mean, there are triggers already in place. When we sewered New Silver Beach, we drew a line around the 230 houses that we thought needed to be sewered. We took it to town meeting. Town meeting said, basta, those are the 230 and no others. We then hired a contractor to do the sewering. They had a fixed number of time to install them. Done. Listening to this whole discussion, I think you're all aware that I have suggested a totally different paradigm for dealing with how we might assist people with putting in IAs, and using basically an extension of the model that we used in Little Pond. The town bought all the grinder pumps. The assumption I'm making is that to make this work, we first have a responsible management entity. Until we have that, putting in a zillion IAs makes no sense. But assuming that we did have that, and the town either was running it themselves, or they let a contract to someone else to run that management entity, and we decided, as an example, we're going to start with the boundary around Fiddler's Cove, for example. We do that boundary, we go to town meeting, we say that's the boundary we're going to deal with. We go to our responsible management entity and we say, put out to bid for the IAs that we want to use in that particular watershed with these set of specifications. It shall perform at this specification. That goes out to bid. The town then buys those units and everybody gets the same unit. Therefore, the monitoring, the maintenance for that responsible management entity becomes incredibly simplified compared to everybody going out and grabbing. I just think that as a paradigm. Now, that still doesn't get us past the problem of us having to go to the state to get special legislation to make areas served by IAs be treated the same way as areas that are served by sewers. But I just think this makes it simple. Everybody gets a box or a portion of a box. We don't worry about my system costing $40,000, my neighbor's costing $80,000, and grants from the state. You just get that help.
But every time you say that, you need to say whether you're just buying it, not just, everybody agrees in the bulk purchase, I think. The problem is you need, as I think you just said, you need the legislation to avoid having to resell it to the homeowner
You're not
at the
selling it
same
to-
price that you
you're not
paid
s-
for it.
you're not
If you
selling
give
it
it
to
to them, that's illegal.
Well, it is at the moment.
Right.
I'm just
That's-
saying
I just
that's
said
why you get
that
the
requires
special.
the time delay of
You're in
legislation.
violent agreement.
I will point this out. As John pointed out, the town purchased the E1s. These are the low-pressure sewers.
Right.
And then when the installers showed up, they picked them up and put them in
Right.
on private property. So we just got this memo from town council and the assistant town manager, which would say that basically everything we did around Little Pond is not in accordance with state law.
No, they're saying it's okay because that's a sewer, but it won't work for other things until we get a new law. And then, in
Okay,
fact, what we did
I'm not
12
gonna
years
argue
ago
you.
with the
issue-
eco-toilet
the
program
issue-
was also illegal.
The issue for them was enhancing something on private property. When I read this memo, it was about enhancing something on private property. So providing something that went onto private property, you know, I don't want to ask the question back to council, you know, do we have to go back and get, but special legislation is not, it sounds bad when you use that word because it's special, but special legislation happens all the time.
Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, I'm just saying we have to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was just at a meeting with the Urine Diversion Liaison Group with Peter Johnson-Saab, and I asked him specifically about this memo. And I said, well, wait, what about the grinder pumps? He said, they are allowed because it's sewers, IAs aren't allowed. And that, in fact, somebody else asked him, what about the eco-toilet project 12 or 14 years ago? And he said he thinks we got away with something.
We got special legislation.
Okay, so we agree.
Yeah.
And I believe that money was funneled through a county entity, not town of Falmouth, to the participants. And Hildy and Earl, you might know because you were part of that discussion years ago with the Eco Toilet Project. I don't believe the money went from the town directly to the homeowner. It went via a county entity. Is that correct, or do you remember? It's ancient history, but, you know, I think part of the rationale, and I'm in the Little Pond Sewer District, so I was in a lot of those meetings. I think part of the rationale on how to get the grinder pump thing by was it is part of the sewer system. It is physically connected, and it's in lieu of neighborhood or smaller pumps. We're putting a pump at each house in a part of the neighborhood rather than a bigger pump on the corner of some piece of property. So it's connected to the sewer system. And I think that's the distinction you were talking about, Steve Layton, that different than a freestanding unit on somebody's property, it's part of the sewer system, not a freestanding IA
That's
improvement.
that's
think
how
that
I
was the
understood Peter,
distinction
yes.
Back in the Little Pond thing, and that's, gosh, 10 years ago now. Anyway.
So this is a conversation relative to subsidies. Tom, you want to chime in?
Yes, I'd like to have a couple of minutes to add a little bit more special sauce to the discussion. Maybe you guys can share them or something back there. I ran some quick numbers. And of course, the letter that we received this afternoon popped a bunch of the special party balloons that I had gotten together. But as you can see from the rather involved long title, I think an important way we could subsidize this thing and make it equitable to some extent to everyone and ensure reasonable, high-quality monitoring of the system is for the town to provide the monitoring through either a separate town agency or a contractor that's been hired by the town. Numbers we've got right now, and everything's subject to inflation going forward that we have right now, say quarterly monitoring of these systems could be delivered for about $800 to $1,000 a year. And as I mentioned already, either a town agency, or more likely, we might have a town contracted entity to provide this service. Now, I've lowballed these numbers, assume that installation costs for a new advanced septic system in Falmouth would run from $25,000 to $50,000, and the Falmouth Town Meeting votes a 30% write-off of the betterment cost. That's been a pattern recently for a bunch of projects here in town. So that 30% per system would range from $7,500 to $15,000 per each system. And right now, Kristen has just cranked the numbers, and we've come up with something greater than 6,500 parcels within the geoboundaries that we've designated so far that would require this. And if you multiply that 6,500 plus parcels, I don't know what the final number is going to be, by the $7,500 to $15,000 per parcel yields a write-off, which this is a cost of Falmouth, of $49 million to $97 million, right? And as was wisely pointed out in the letter that we got today, there's nothing in Falmouth's capital plan right now that sees a cost like that. As I said, I've deliberately lowballed these. I would guess the number would be quite a bit higher. He'll agree, but I've kept these numbers low. Now, if we look at the $800 to $1,000 monitoring cost per year per system, this range of write-off costs would cover 7.5 to 19 years of monitoring these 6,500 systems, right? You get a lot of bang for the buck. So we have the short-term advantage of, instead of this big cash crunch as systems are constructed and bought online, and we have townspeople coming to us saying we need $1 million this year and we need $1 million next year, we'd have a slow ramp up of cost. And it's going to be very, very predictable, because we're going to see the number of systems coming into the, the number of systems coming in to the program. But this is what I think is particularly important. If we have complete control of the monitoring process, either through a town agency or through a contracted agency such as SUP, the county agency's been set up, we're going to have a much higher probability of high quality and consistency of monitoring procedures. In addition, and this is something we haven't discussed yet this year, as the effectiveness of various specified systems are tested over, say, 2 years or 3 years of quarterly sampling, we can move these proven systems, ones that are proven to be performing, into a pool where they would be sampled randomly. Maybe 10% of these might be sampled each quarterly, which again would lead to a dramatic drop-off in the cost of this system to the town. And I'll entertain any questions there. Steve?
The stuff at the end is what John Waterbury and George Hoyfelter put into a procedure for the SUP, and having the county do it or something, that all makes sense. Nobody disagrees with that. But if you go back to your monetary stuff at the beginning,
Yes.
I'm confused by your use of the term write-off, because we're talking about tax credits. The town doesn't pay. I mean, just let me finish. The town doesn't pay any taxes, and individuals can't write off any of this in the normal meaning.
The town writing it off.
But the town isn't a for-profit organization, and they don't pay taxes. I don't understand what the
device, and they
term
need money
means.
to do business. And we've talked already about how the town, when betterment project comes in, the person that gets the betterment owes money to the town for the cost of that betterment, right? If you get a sewer, or if you get your street paved, or if you get a new sidewalk.
So you're saying that the town would credit the homeowner? Or at first I thought
Right,
what you were saying,
the homeowner
at first
would
I
not.
thought you were going to say is, regardless of how we agree on subsidizing or not, tax credits, blah, 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 the initial cost,
Right.
another thing we can choose to or not to do is cover the costs of monitoring.
Right. But
Which
I
is
think
a-
we should do that. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
That's
but I would just say cover the cost of monitoring. When you say write off,
I'm not writing off the cost of monitoring. What I'm talking about is, for instance, with the Little Pond project, the cost was $20,600 per house. The town said, you only owe us 70% of whatever that is. It's like $13,800 per house. Maybe Ed remembers the
right.
exact number.
that's the betterment, right?
That's what they owed for their share of the betterment. The town picked up 30%. In other words, the town wrote off that cost because the town had already paid the contractors to install that system.
It just
What
drives me nuts when you use the word write off. The homeowner's paying 70% and the town is paying 30%. To each of them, it's real money.
Right.
And they're really paying it. Nobody's writing anything off. It's just that's how it's divvied up. The town is paid 30%.
Well,
the
I don't know the
homeowner
formal
pays
definition
70%.
of write-off.
And
but-
then there are annual costs as well,
But
which, for instance, you could say, okay, the town's going to cover that, or the homeowner has to cover that.
Right, but the point is the town right now can't afford to, in effect, send 30% of the installation costs of 6,500 systems to the homeowners that have had them installed.
What the town can do is issue a long-term, low-interest loan. But anything beyond that, where they're refunding the principal, like writing off student loans by the federal government, something like that, is illegal for the town to do, because that's subsidizing something on private property until we change the law. And if we change the law,
Yeah, but we're not asking, I'm saying they shouldn't do that. That's the whole point of this discussion. The town can't afford to do it, because right off the bat, even with a lowball estimate of the cost of the system, it's going to be $50 to $100 million to do the first 6,500 systems. It doesn't matter what you call the process, it's what it costs the town to engage in this activity.
I'll let somebody
Right.
else ask.
I mean, we can run through the numbers again.
We'll talk about it afterwards.
Questions from anybody on the board? Yes, Ed?
The frequency of monitoring is mandated by the DEP.
Right.
Unless they change their mind and their policy, they won't care whether it's a proven system or not. If it's not a proven system, they don't allow it for general use. But a general use approved system, thou shalt monitor it for 2 years, I believe.
That's-
4 times a year until it's operating correctly, and then twice a year, and then you go to once a year.
That's
But-
that's a local regulation.
I believe that's a
But the
DEP
point is,
regulation.
Ed, that's exactly the process I said here for 2 years.
Yeah, and, but it's you've got a whole paragraph there talks about, well, we would have a pool of proven systems that would be less frequently monitored, thereby lowering the cost. And you can't do that under the current DEP reg, as I understand it. The DEP
Well, already
says-
you just said they allow less frequent monitoring after 2
But
years.
it's once a year for each and every system, not.
Right.
You got 100 of them, we only sample these 10 every other year.
Well, I don't know, but my point is, whatever it works out to be, I'm saying the cost is going to come down
It will
dramatically.
come down as the systems
Right.
prove, but they consider each individual IA a wastewater treatment.
Yes, I know that.
You need a licensed operator to be responsible for it. Somebody that's got I think it's called a Class 4 wastewater treatment plant operator license.
Right.
And that's who does the actual monitoring or has the responsibility of it. Whether that's enforced or not is a whole nother issue. It seems like
Right.
compliance is really loose, but that is the regulation. The only other minor point I would say is I think the $1,000 number that the folks from the Mass TC on the SUP was for a full bore service of, we will help you pick your system, we will monitor the installation, we will do the sampling. So the cost of just the sampling probably is half that on an annual basis per house. Just
Yeah, I
pulling-
don't know what the real
but,
number is
you know,
going to be.
in that premium option, they gave us, I think, 3 options, and that was the most expensive one. They did not break out a cost for the others, which were simpler in a scale, down to just doing monitoring. But there was, annual maintenance, stocking spare parts and all that in the premium system, which was ballparked at 1,000 a year. The timing again becomes critical. How many systems is the industry able to support?
Yeah, I know, but that's
And-
not material at
No.
all to this.
Well, it is, because the cash flow becomes the king. When does the town have to spend that 40, 50, 60, 80 million dollars?
Right.
If it's spread over 100 years, it's one thing. If it's spread over 2 years, ooh, that's a whole nother smoke.
No, we're thinking decadal timescales, I
Yes,
believe.
absolutely, because I don't think anybody has an idea of the capacity of the industry, but it's small.
Yep.
You know, it was a real fun thing when people were getting installers just to do their lateral connections in Little Pond.
Yep.
And it's not just Falmouth, it's all these other communities that are currently installing some number of IAs. So,
Yep.
I talk too much, sorry.
I think we're trying to sell two different things. If you're on the Little Pond sewer, you, according to the amount of water that goes through your water meter, you pay a sewer fee to the town every year. That fee, if we were to do the same thing in a district with IAs, we would say, you will pay a comparable fee to the town. That money is what we would use to pay the responsible management entity to do the monitoring, the maintenance, pumping the systems.
Right.
And controlling that. So that's one thing. Then the other thing is the subsidy. And it seems to me the Achilles heel of what you're suggesting here is that there's a different subsidy from one household to another depending how much the system costs. So if I replace my system when it's mandated, and it costs me $40,000, my next door neighbor costs $70,000, and you're going to give a percentage of that.
But there's a cap.
No, there's no, this is a flat fee. The town would pick up the monitoring costs.
There's no subsidy
No,
for
he's
capital
moved on
or
from the
installation.
monitoring.
You're
Wait a
wrong.
minute, there's three people at once.
Let Tom talk.
Yeah. No, I'm just suggesting this would be one way to subsidize the IAs. And I don't know right now what it's going to cost per year to do it, but it's very straightforward, and everybody, regardless of whether they qualified for the owner, principal residence, state tax credit or not, everybody would get the same benefit from this.
But I mean, that's simply the sewer fee. That's simply
But
the
it's
sewer
not-
fee.
well-
And when George Highfelder and I sat down and came up with this concept of a responsible management entity several years ago.
Right.
And we sat down and we worked the numbers. It does not work cost-wise to be a comparable fee as the sewer fee is now. If you've got to do everything that DEP wants, monitoring 4 times a year. So we suggested to DEP that we have a random number.
Right.
That we pick one house by random number, gets done, the house gets done once every year.
Yep.
And we sat down with DEP, and we never could get them to buy into that reduction. You cannot make the responsible management entity work for $1,000 a year. The numbers just don't work. I mean, individual homeowners are now paying for just a maintenance contract, something like $3,500 a year.
Right.
So-
But the point is this is a one way that would be uniformly applicable, and right now, on the front of it, much more predictable in terms of cost and much cheaper than doing some sort of subsidy to individual homeowners, some fraction of the cost of their system, right? That was my point. That's the only point I'm trying to make. Yes, John?
I guess I just want to be clear. So you're saying there wouldn't be a subsidy for capital costs, installation costs. It would be money that would go towards monitoring the same amount per household regardless of the amount of tax credit you get. So in my mind, you're still penalizing the people who don't qualify for the tax credit. They're taking a larger burden on.
Right, and that would be an issue they might have with the state, but in my case, this makes the town look good. We're saying the state is forcing you to do this, but we're going to help you out a little bit. Call it citizen psychology or whatever.
All right.
Anyway.
I've had a few hands out here in the audience, so I want
Yes.
to.
Matt,
Hildy?
Hilda, somebody.
Hildy? I'll go Hildy first, I'll come to you, madam. Going right to left.
Go ahead.
My right to my left.
All righty. I'm not going to have to carry you back to the seat, am I?
No, I'm getting better. Hilda Menge, Green Center. A couple comments. What I understand about the monitoring right now, but I might be wrong, that every time they monitor, it has to perform according to whatever it was meant to be. If it doesn't perform that way, those 2 years, 4 times per year, starts over again.
That's right.
So the 2 years is it's rare that it's only for 2 years, 4 times a year. It will be probably longer, so more costly. The other comment is that the landscaping is a large cost for many people. That's not in here. So people that have a home that they inherited, they have a very low income, they have a nice landscape made over the last few generations. That might be a big cost that they cannot handle. And then the next cost is the electricity to maintain it. So there are lots of costs in addition to the installation that has to be considered and be told to every person all the time. So we're not just saying it's $30,000 on average, because it won't be.
So just a small clarification. On those samples, there is an averaging basis. So you,
Okay.
if your,
that's
if your
good.
target's 18,
Yeah.
and one of your samples is 20 or 22, if the other ones are down lower, and
Well, that's
the
good.
average over the 4 taken falls inside a certain range. So it's not just a
That's
one
good.
failure throws you out, okay? I
Is
want
it
you
an
to
average over the year then, or how do they do it? Because if you have 2 lows and suddenly 1 high and then a low, I mean, how do they figure that?
Look on the Board of Health
Yeah, it's the Board of
home
Health.
rule regulations. It's all laid out
Okay,
exactly.
good,
Yeah.
good.
And you can get an engineer to go prove that you're removing X percentage of all the nitrogen, and
Yeah,
that
yeah,
it's okay
okay.
that your number's a little higher, because whatever. But, yeah, it's not a
One-time failure.
It's not a single, like, you
That's
got all these great numbers over 2 years, and one number is a little bit over your thing. So, yeah, it's not quite that draconian.
Do you know what the average has been so far? But if it's like, how many people had to do it longer for 4 times a year than 2 years? Have you seen that happen?
I can only reflect back when I was on the Board of Health. We routinely had people coming in who had 4 good values, and we would reduce their sampling time.
Oh, good.
We also had people that would come in and say, I've got all these numbers and I want relief, and we'd be, but no, you've got to go another year and get better values,
Okay,
okay? So,
yeah, thank you.
I'd say it was 50-50. John, would you say? People that came in?
Yeah.
It was not like 100% of the people came in, but people seldom came in if they didn't have good numbers.
Good. That's good to know. Thank you.
Matthew Hanley from Surfrider Foundation. I've been following this septic. I grew up in Falmouth, was born, raised here, and this sewering in Falmouth is Falmouth's big dig. There's not going to be anything that the town meeting members and the taxpayers of Falmouth are going to be happy with. You know, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of big numbers thrown out there, and but I've been following septic, you know, the wastewater in Falmouth and Mashpee. You know, when you listen to the Mashpee Sewer Commission, you know, they talk about let's get the most bang for our buck. And I know AI systems right now aren't perfect. You know, the IA systems, excuse me, aren't perfect, but there are new systems in the works and coming down. You know, we need to do something. In fact, the town of Falmouth should have came up with a policy years ago. Between our last sewer expansion and now, you know, before this board was formed, there wasn't a lot that was really done, in my opinion. And I really feel like, want to thank you guys, everyone here on the board, for your hard work. You can, by attending these meetings, I can see the thought process of everyone that's on the board and the diversity of, you know, backgrounds and the diversity of, like, how can we get this done? I really appreciate it. That's what's really important about having a board like yours. You know, we have to subsidize this in some way to get this rolling forward. And we need to really keep it simple without overthinking it. You know, we already have programs that we're subsidizing. The Buzzards Bay Coalition right now is running a program. They've put 20 systems in now, Corin, or 31 systems that Buzzards Bay Coalition, you know, has put in. You know, we have people we can go to and say, hey, you know, what did you learn? What are your lessons? What's your lessons learned? How can we do this? How can we keep it affordable? What are your numbers looking like? You know, the other thing is we have the county came to us with this SUP. I really feel like a county-wide SUP program is going to be the best policy. The more towns, the more systems we can get into a program, it's going to start lowering the monitoring costs. It's going to ensure the taxpayers getting the best cost because they're going through a program that's you know, state, and there's going to be everything's going to be the same. You know, so when you're doing monitoring, and because those systems are being monitored by an entity that either Falmouth sets up or we sign on to the Barnstable SUP, then you know that all these systems were supervised, they were designed, those designs were reviewed, and then we know what to expect with those systems, and then we have that data. Collecting that data is one of the most important things. But also, this subsidy, whichever way you do it, we've talked about a couple different programs. You know, I think the people at home, like, I've been following this since 2009, and I barely can understand everything that's being presented. You know, homeowners at home, there might have to be a presentation that kind of, I hate to say it, but kind of makes it in a way that they can understand. It kind of dumbs it down. So it's more clear of what they're going to be buying into. In 2000, when we did the last expansion, when we did Mara Vista expansion, my friends, parents, and grandparents, they were living in Mara Vista. Those affordable, you know, fixed income homes got decimated by that project. That changed the whole character of Mara Vista. Mara Vista was affordable housing before that sewer project. Because of that sewer project, that pushed up the price of those homes. All that stuff changed the whole character of that neighborhood.
Work on staying on subsidies.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, like, this needs to be subsidized. And, you know, for these people that are on fixed income, our senior citizens, you know, my parents, you know, and I'm 50 now, you know, I still have a ways to go, but, you know, people that are right there, getting close to retirement, they're going to say, well, how am I going to pay for a $40,000 AI system? You know, I was at the West Falmouth Village Association, and one of the members of the West Falmouth Village Association said he was paying for his son's AI system, and it was $80,000. And that was the system, not the landscaping. So, and we can't get bogged down with landscaping, because that's going to change per property. We need to get down to the bread and butter, which is just the system itself. And that system, you know, what benefit does that give to the homeowner, and what benefit does that give to the town? And then we need to come up with a program that subsidizes it for those homeowners that are on a fixed income. You know, if we're going to make this work and we're going to roll this out to make real change in the town of Falmouth, in our watersheds, we need to roll it out quickly, and we need to roll it out in a manner that's fair and equitable to every resident of this town. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to try to wrap up the subsidy discussion if I can, Tom.
I'm going to wrap up one closing comment.
Okay.
Matt fell back into that trap again of calling them AIs 3 times in the last closing sentences. I have solved that problem, if you notice, all the way through mine. I called them advanced systems, dropped the innovative, and I believe the state now officially calls them advanced systems.
They may.
So then we won't have that confusion anymore. And hearing no more questions, queries from the crowd, I'm going to try to get rid of this thing here. Let's see, what,
I always like to stick to my
Whoops.
timeline of 2 hours and no more.
yeah. And I'm done,
I'm
I
gonna
think.
move, unless there is something extremely pressing around subsidies. This is a very open and wide discussion, a lot of good input, a lot of good concepts. You know, got a letter from the town that says you need special legislation. Okay, we need to get our act together a little bit and tell them, go get, what's the process for special legislation? Town meeting, how does it ever go? And get there. But I'd like to move to item 2. Find out a few more 1,000 homes that have to get an IA system, or an advanced system, an AS. At least it's not an ASS. By the way, my grandkids refer to me as a toss, which is the old stuffed shirt.
Aren't they like 2 and 5?
Yeah, the 2-year-old looks at me, she says, "You're an old stuffed shirt," whenever I tell her to do something, yeah.
Kristen Rathjen, Science Wares. So the next watershed that we're looking at is Bournes Pond. On the right, this is the extent of the Bournes Pond watershed. On the left, it has the more southern portion. This is 28 through here. So we're doing this the same way we've done the last 900 of these. Bournes Pond watershed has approximately 1,200 parcels. About 970 of those are single-family residents. Since the time of the finalization of the MEP, there are 128 parcels that have been listed as being year-built since the MEP.
So just back to Ed's concern about any new construction, that's roughly 5%. 128 parcels versus 1,194 is 5%.
The MEP for Bournes Pond was finalized in 2005.
Now, you report 128 parcels, right? Yeah.
5% in what time period? 1 year?
Since
2005.
2005, so almost 20 years.
Over
So
20
it
years.
takes 18 years to do 5%.
Yeah.
10%.
I'm just trying to give a benchmark.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I mean, the point is, it's very slow.
10% would be.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do.
119.
It may be symbolic and set a good
10%.
example,
Thank you.
but it's very slow.
I'm just pointing that out. People ask.
Well, some people don't know numbers.
The freshwater resources in this watershed include Bournes Brook, which has inputs from a Shumet pond. Bournes Brook has a 30% attenuation factor. Shumet Pond has a 50% attenuation factor and has a 4% outflow to Bournes Brook. So very small contribution from a Shumet Pond. Same data sources, we're looking at the SMAS long-term monitoring data, the TMDL, the MEP, and the Cape Cod Commission. So these are the MEP numbers. For Bournes Pond, the present MEP nitrogen reduction load is 4,162 kilograms. The Cape Cod Commission planning tool says it is 6,306. So Cape Cod Commission would include some of those 128 parcels that were built since the time of the MEP. Not all of them, but some of them. So that's some of the reason for the big difference in there. This is the Cape Cod Commission's map. They have it broken down into just Bournes Pond, Main Sub-Embayment, and Israel's Cove. Right around 28, the MEP has the Bournes Brook, so that's everything north of 28 pretty much.
So this is a shared watershed with Mashpee.
Not enough.
I'm just pointing that out small.
I mean, that's technically sandwiched there too,
Yeah.
because that's the
Okay.
town boundary. Water use, looking at the MEP versus the MVP, they're pretty close. The average single-family water use from the MEP report was 151 gallons per day. MVP, which uses slightly more recent data, is 153, so very close. So doing the calculations the same way that has been done using the average water use for the single-family residents, applying that for sewer reduction, for an IA performing at 10 milligrams per liter, which is the state's recommended best available nitrogen reducing technology performance level, would be a reduction of 3.1 kilograms per year for a single family residence. For parcels, single-family residential parcels that would be connected to sewer, it would be a 4.4 kilogram per year reduction. The existing IAs at 19 milligrams per liter are a 1.4 kilogram reduction. So in Bourne's Pond, the major implementation is the inlet widening that hopefully will happen soon. The SMAST and GHD, SMAST did model calculations on what the proposed inlet widening, what the equivalent nitrogen reduction would be. Basically, when you open the inlet, you're getting lower concentration surface waters from Vineyard Sound coming in, which they back calculate to be equivalent of a land loading reduction. But they estimate it to be 1,995 kilograms. And they have it solely coming out of the Bourne's Pond, the main sub-embayment, nothing coming out of Israel's Cove. The estimated planned sewer reduction, this is the portion along 28 and the Fisherman's Cove neighborhood. Existing IAs, so for the main portion of Bourne's Pond, it meets the nitrogen requirements from the MEP. Israel's Cove and Bourne's Brook still have nitrogen reductions needed. Again, looking at the MVP numbers, these are looking at the individual parcels, individual parcel water use averages as opposed to just lumping all the single-family homes together. You can see that there's a lot more potential IA upgrade requirements. This is what the long-term monitoring from the Pond Watch program through SMAS looks like for the Sentinel Station in Bourne's Pond. So this first bar is what they basically used for the MEP. And the next data set that I have access to is a 10-year block. And then starting in 2017, I have all the annual data. So the orange line is the threshold. That's the target. So this is just how that Sentinel Station has been varying annually. So I mentioned that SMAS modeled the equivalent nitrogen reduction based on the surface water, additional surface water inputs coming from Vineyard Sound. That was based on this number, the concentration of their long-term monitoring station in Vineyard Sound, which is down here, from the time of the MEP. Here is the Pond Watch monitoring data for that station in Vineyard Sound. So you can see there has been some increase. Nobody has really gone back to look and see what that means for the potential nitrogen reduction attributed to the inlet widening. So the proposed geoboundary on the right here, this is what a bigger portion of the watershed looks like. This green is the proposed sewer area, the Fisherman's Cove, and along Route 28. This is what was identified in the CWMP. Israel's Cove, all of the parcels within Israel's Cove would be within the IA geoboundary, as well as a portion of the ones up in Bourne's Brook. So this just looks at those areas a little bit more closely. So in total, there are 237 parcels within the light blue geoboundaries for this watershed. Using the IA lot screening that we've been doing, this just highlights areas that may be a little bit more challenging for getting an IA to fit on the parcel. But you can see over here, this development, which has all IAs in it, came up on the screening. So again, the screening tool was done using the specification for one specific system. There are ways to make things work. It just may require additional engineering to get it in. So these are the two tables looking at the MEP versus the MVP, what the proposed geoboundaries, upgrading those to IA. So Israel's Cove, all of the parcels within the Israel's Cove sub-embayment were in the IA boundary for performing at 10 milligrams per liter. It does not remove what is needed from there. Up in Bourne's Brook, even accounting for the 30% attenuation of Bourne's Brook, what was in the geoboundary would reduce what the MEP requirement for in that area was. Under MVP numbers, you don't get there. So that's basically what the summary says. One thing to note about Israel's Cove, as I said, when SMAS did the evaluation of the nitrogen reduction equivalent of the inlet widening, there was nothing directly within the Israel's Cove sub-embayment, but when they showed what the modeled concentrations at the monitoring station in Israel's Cove would be, it had a 6% reduction, but they didn't assign any mass reduction to that. So that's what we're working with there. It will, once the inlet is widened, clearly monitoring will be crucial to see how it's actually affecting Israel's Cove. Fertilizer and stormwater, that comes to 247 kilograms. The full-scale aquaculture plan could be an additional almost 900 kilograms. Caveat to that is the majority of the suitable aquaculture areas are near the inlet. So their impacts to the upper portion of the watershed may be minimal, but they could actually help Israel's Cove. So the proposed IA district for Bournes Pond represents about 20% of the parcels in the watershed, and the proposed sewer district represents 25% of the parcels. So this is the running map for the south coast. So the light blue are all of the geo boundaries that were proposed, suggested for Wacoit, and now we have the ones for Bournes Pond. The table, we've now added Bournes Pond onto the table for our final tally table. And then this I threw on at the end is basically clipped from the memo that talks about how SMAST got their numbers for the widening. That was mainly for your information if you were curious why none of it made sense. That was all.
Very good. I mean, my first reaction to this is, you know, this inlet widening has taken an infinitely long time to get to the point where it even might proceed forward. But compared to a number of the other estuaries that you've presented to us, I'm looking at this estuary and saying if we do inlet widening, the number of IAs we need is not a significant number. So in some ways, it's a good estuary to focus on to see if what we're doing, what we think we're doing, you know, our presumptions, once implemented, will actually have some results. I mean, we're monitoring Little Pond right now to see what goes on. I just feel like there's a couple of these other estuaries, there's so many IAs to get in there that it'd be hard to see the impact for a while. Go ahead, Tom wants to speak.
Yeah, Kristen, if you could go back to the Pond Watch data figure. That's very scary. No, the Vineyard Sound, right. You see 6 years there of an almost steady increase in nitrogen concentrations in Vineyard Sound, to the point where last year the Vineyard Sound concentration is as high as the background numbers are already in Bournes Pond. And hydrodynamically, that says to me you could widen that inlet to 100 yards and you wouldn't make things better. But I'm a little suspicious that the numbers in Vineyard Sound are actually that high, and I'm going to try to put Corin Peterson on the spot. Do you know what numbers they're getting off the Falmouth Heights sampling, or maybe Amy knows?
Half of that.
That's what I'm thinking. Right. I think these are bogus numbers. I hope they are, because
well, John Waterbury and I have had this conversation many times, and he agrees with that. And my response is, these are the numbers that modeling was done with. This is the data set. All I can do is show that data set.
Right.
Whether you want to put all your eggs in that basket or not.
Does anyone know where was this measured?
Hold on a second.
Right
Amy,
here,
I'm gonna let
at
Amy,
this sampling.
Amy's been, this has been part of the outfall.
So this is the data that SMAST has collected and provided. There's lots of other data
about water quality in Vineyard Sound. And the Buzzards Bay Coalition has been collecting some. The Center for Coastal Studies out of Provincetown has also been collecting it. We are hoping that we've been talking to the Center for Coastal Studies and hoping that they can do an evaluation of all of that data and give us some context. I think there's variability, and it's not a lot of samples, and so that's where you've ended up with. But I don't have a specific number I want to say we should be using instead. I'm just saying there's a lot more data, and we're going to be looking at it.
Do we know exactly where the measurements were made?
It's marked there in the chart.
The yellow circle?
Yes.
This is the pond watch
Is that
sampling
reasonably
station.
to scale, or is that just some artist's idea of a nice place?
This is from the MEP.
Put a
So
yellows.
this is the MEP report where all of the yellow circle is me to highlight that's, the little red dot in there is what MEP says their sample location is.
Do we have a full data set other than nitrogen that would point to some anomaly, or are all the other data consistent with well-mixed seawater?
I haven't really analyzed all of the other data.
But typically, we get dissolved oxygen, right? We get DO, salinity, and then there's grab samples that get measured for the nitrogen. I don't know what else is in the
Yeah.
list. Chlorophyll, right?
Yeah, all the
phosphorus.
nitrogen species, particulates.
Do you want the data set?
I wouldn't mind it, but whoever does look at it should have a complete data set, so we're comparing apples to apples, and they understand seasonality,
Yep.
temperature, any data that's associated with this should, because I'm concerned about, that raised a flag for me too, and you have 0.6 and what supposedly is well-mixed water that we're dumping an outfall water into.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that
But again, where we've got,
this really can't be.
and part of this is, Amy alluded to, where this data comes from and who's sampling it. At the outfall site, through the generosity of Buzzards Bay, we're getting, is it monthly? I think it's monthly. So we've been collecting monthly data, not 2 or 3 times over the course of the year. We're getting a little bit better data set at the outfall location.
Is that online somewhere? Because I did a quick search and couldn't find any reference to it.
It probably is.
Okay.
It's probably not self-evident, but I will make sure that the committee gets it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
that-
Last I knew, they've collected the samples, but the analysis was a little behind.
Right.
Okay, but we're getting multiple readings on a pretty regular basis. It's just
Right.
getting the data set together to be reported.
Yeah.
Once again, as an excellent, are we down to, how many more do we have to go?
Too many.
Huh?
Too many.
Too many.
But Great Pond's the next one, right?
Green Pond's next.
That's one of the big ones.
It's one of the big ones.
Can I ask a different question about this presentation?
If you didn't ask a different question, I would be disappointed.
Can you go back to I think it was in a group of slides where you showed the geo-boundaries, where you were first determining them.
This?
Yes. So the green is the proposed sewer area.
Yep,
And the light blue is the proposed IA area.
correct.
I was once a registered professional engineer in Maryland, not anything to do with this kind of engineering. And I only used it once when I was designing cantilevered beam for a deck, so I was very naive. And I got my ears pinned back by the county building department, who said, oh, engineers are supposed to show their work. So who were the engineers? It wasn't you, who originally decided that the sewer area would end there, and that's where whatever you calculate the IA area to be would begin. And do we ever get to see that work?
So.
That work's posted online. That's the whole comprehensive wastewater plan.
Yep. This
And
part was
they did
discussed in the
marginal studies, like
CWMP.
what if you included those other lots that are
They-
right in
I
that fork
can't- I
between
can't
the
speak-
green?
But there is a whole big report. I might have a copy of it in my workshop, holding up like some pieces of old wood I could find for you.
I might want to see it, because
Yeah.
as we find out more and more bad things about the costs of IAs, of course, the costs of sewers go up with inflation.
We're back.
It seems like it's getting close.
Right, but I'm back to a thing that you keep asking me to write down. If we get, right now, land-based, we are really constrained for how much wastewater we can get rid of. Right now. We're using some land-based options in West Falmouth, the
Right,
top of the hill.
right, right.
And this
Looked
is
at a
the
couple locations
densest
that did not
neighborhood.
have an infinite amount of capacity. We're modeling, and we're working our way down to try to get permission for an outfall with a 2 MGD capacity. The current green areas, all added up with all the other sewer areas, have an estimated wastewater flow of 1.7 million. That's a round number. It's
Yeah,
probably
you know, I get the,
1.725.
nobody's going to remember the numbers,
No, no,
but the
it's 1.7.
qualitative idea is
And
that,
that the outfall is capable of 2 MGD. So there's a little bit of extra flow in there, but until we get the outfall, we can't figure out how to reallocate.
but qualitatively, is it possible that during the process of mandating IAs, let's say we're successful and we get the outfall, is there any option for them saying, oh, maybe in some places it's cheaper to expand the sewer area and not require so many IAs?
That would be the watershed plan, which we have not done. We're still at the sort of, you know.
But it's a possibility, it's a theoretical possibility that you could do that.
So on paper, there's 300,000 gallons of wastewater capacity in an outfall. Where do you want to distribute it, Steve?
I see what you're saying. No, I'm
Okay?
not saying it's easy.
We haven't touched it.
I'm not saying it's easy.
Right now, we're working on getting an outfall that's not, the whole land-based stuff over the last several years as kept looking at it, we realized we were really constrained. We were really boxed in terms of being able to do anything. With the outfall, we've chosen to go a little bit beyond the 1.7 number, because hydraulically and a lot of other ways from the elevation and whatnot, we can make it work, okay? We know we have some excess in there, but we're not yet allocating it any place until we have an outfall.
Okay, I'm just
And then
saying
there's
this is
another excess.
where the really big bucks are, and we're trusting you and Amy and GHD,
Well, you're
which are
fine.
all good entities, so maybe we're fine.
Yeah, there's, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a map always that shows, I think it's from the USGS, right? That shows where all the septic systems are. And when you look at that, and you look at where the sewers are going in, you can almost say, you know, where there's a bunch of black dots, maybe that's a better place to think about using up sewer capacity in the future, okay? Because you get the bang, that's the bang for the buck thing. But we're not tackling that today. We're just trying to get through geo-boundaries and get an outfall permitted. Right now, we're just trying to get borings for the outfall.
Yes.
That's an ongoing exercise. You want to sit down yet?
No, I have to do the next one.
Ah. Oh, I thought that was Steve's.
No.
So, just to set this up, over the last couple of meetings, my conscience to my left here has more than once said, I need numbers, I need some numbers to understand everything. So Kristen's put together a little sort of, all these parcels, all these little areas, what do the numbers really mean at the end of the day? So,
Right.
this is,
Can I also say something in introduction? I just wanted to see percentages in the big picture. And the incredible thing about working for this committee is that we have Kristen. So that all we have to do is have a vague idea and say to Kristen, how about some percentages? And shazam, she comes up with these incredible PowerPoints, so enjoy.
Yeah,
But the-
this one's all Steve.
Steve, what percentage is Christian's salary of a livable wage?
we have, we will shortly get to.
That's above my pay
We will
scale.
shortly get to agenda item 4.
I know, that's what I'm
Okay?
thinking, forward thinking here.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so this piggybacks on all of these geo-boundary conversations we've been having and basically takes into consideration that big tally table at the end. So Steve Layton asked, like he said, how it relates to a lot of things. So I tried to make this as least boring as possible. So general Falmouth figures. We're talking for this about parcels. Just like when we're talking about the geo boundaries, we're talking about parcels. We're not talking about whether they're multifamily units that could have more than one system or more than one sewer connection. These are straight parcel numbers. So the town of Falmouth has 23,400 parcels. That's from the town assessor database. Residential parcels, there's about 20,400. So residential means single-family resident, multifamily apartments, condos, even vacant land that's developable for residential uses. Currently, in town, there are 2,149 parcels connected to the sewer. Looking at the graph that is shown at a lot of presentations, the bar graph of Falmouth that has all of the nitrogen reduction requirements for each estuary. The total for that is 42,000 kilograms of nitrogen that needs to be removed throughout town per year.
Can you imagine?
All right, so the nitrogen-sensitive areas, these were defined by the state. These are the shaded watersheds. When we're talking about geoboundaries in nitrogen-sensitive areas, that's these. We're not talking about Sippawisset. We're not talking about Herringbrook. In the nitrogen-sensitive areas only, there's 18,400 parcels. Those that are on the sewer that are in the nitrogen-sensitive areas is about 1,680. So there's a portion of that 2,150 down in Woods Hole. You've got the hospital lights, you've got the high school. Those are not in nitrogen-sensitive areas. In the CWMP, the planned and proposed sewer areas, so the T-Ticket at Capesket is the planned area. Fisherman's Cove and Wacoit, Antler Shores, Seacoast Shores, and Sea Pit were all proposed areas. In those areas, there are about 3,500 parcels. So that would bring the total number of parcels in the nitrogen-sensitive areas to 5,180.
Kristen, can I interrupt this one?
Yeah.
So the takeaway from this is that about a quarter of the parcels in Falmouth are proposed to be sewered.
Correct.
I mean, that you can grasp. If you turned off this slide for 5 seconds and gave us a quiz, how many people in the room would remember any of those numbers?
Mm-hmm.
But you probably ought to be able to remember that about a quarter of the parcels will be sewered. And there was a similar fraction in your previous slide. 20% of something is something.
Ed's going to remember that it's 5,180 because he's got a good memory.
So
Gotta
if
watch
you
out,
want to
people.
know what those individual sewer areas are doing for the TMDL, for the nitrogen reduction in the individual watersheds, that's what this is. It's telling you the percent of the nitrogen reduction in those specific areas. So that's just there for the people who need it.
So why is Eel Pond got more than it needs?
Because once upon a time, this committee struggled with what to do with Wacoit Bay, with all of the interconnectedness and incredible flow dynamics through there. The thought was, and the logistics of where you would start and stop sewers, if there was an excess amount of nitrogen reduction on seacoast shores, that could potentially have a benefit to account for some of the deficit in Childs River. That was never, it hasn't been done, so it's not a proven thing, but because of the flow dynamics of going up through the Sea Pit River, that was the thought behind that, and to cover the whole Seacoast Shores Peninsula.
And this is a question for you and Steve. The other percentages come out because of the decisions about the total capacity available for sewers and where you can best utilize it.
Correct. It was how much discharge capacity and looking at the areas, the most dense areas first, of what needed the sewering and the capacity for what we have for land-based discharge options.
We know more now than when the MEP report came out.
And when we did the 2019 CWMP. All right, so looking at the geo-boundaries, looking at all of the ones we've talked about so far, and a couple that we haven't gotten to yet in meetings. So in the nitrogen-sensitive areas, we still have the 18,400 parcels. That has not changed. So that running table tally, there's a minimum of 6,500 systems. So that is to get the watersheds as best you can to meet the nitrogen reduction requirements in the individual sub-embayments. So there may be areas, let's say Israel's Cove, where if you're doing an IA district, you can't get there, so maybe you have to do more IAs in the main sub-embayment portion to account for it. That's why I'm saying there's a minimum, because not every sub-embayment met the nitrogen removal requirement for the geo-boundaries that have been defined. So here's the math that Steve really wants people to take home. Nitrogen-sensitive areas, so the geo-boundaries, all of those red sections, so the minimum of 6,500 parcels, and this is based on the discharge capacity we have now for expanding sewer. We don't have that expansion capability at this time. So out of the 18,400 parcels in nitrogen-sensitive areas, about at least 35% of the parcels are within a geo-boundary in town, in the nitrogen-sensitive areas. For sewering, 28% of the parcels within nitrogen-sensitive areas are in a planned or proposed sewer area. That's nitrogen-sensitive areas. How that so for looking at the big picture of how much nitrogen, again, this is town-wide total. We're looking at all the individual watersheds. With the IA boundaries and the sewering, looking at the nitrogen reduction potential for what's in the TMDLs, it's about 91%. If we're looking at it town-wide, so including those areas that are not defined as nitrogen sensitive, it's a minimum of 28% of all of the parcels in Falmouth within an IA geoboundary, and 24% of the parcels in Falmouth that are in a proposed or planned sewer area. That's it.
Thank you. Can you go back to the one with the giant red areas? This has giant red areas too, but yes, that one. My point here, my original motivation was, okay, so you can remember this is, it's about a third. And so if you subsidized 100%, remember the town isn't a magic fairy with infinite pots of money. It's simply a way of routing tax money to other things. So if you subsidize 100%, you'd be lowering the cost to the people who are in the orange areas by roughly a factor of 3, and taking a third of their costs on, they would be paying a third, and the other 2/3 of the population that don't live there would be paying the other 2/3. And the other, I'm not saying it should be 100% subsidy, I'm just saying I can hold that in my mind a lot easier than a whole bunch of these 4-digit numbers. And the other thing is, you look at these red areas, and at one time when we were discussing subsidies, we were talking about the people being close to the estuaries. Well, you just take a glance at that map and you can see that that's a joke. The vast majority of those people are not close to any estuary, so they're not getting any particular benefit. That's all I want to say.
So, that 300,000 gallons that we haven't allocated that you want to expand into some sewer area, right? Keeping in mind that every time you sewer a home, you get the benefit of 2 IAs, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay? So if we allocated all 300,000 into areas that we currently are geo-bounding for IAs, we could reduce the total number of IAs by about a third with that 300,000. Okay, just to help you out there.
Yeah.
You know? So it doesn't get rid of IAs, okay?
Oh, right. No, I didn't.
I just wanted to give you
I
a sense
did-
of,
yeah,
you know, like
absolutely,
where the,
yes.
where the
Yes, no, that's-
push edge goes a little
That's,
bit, okay?
I totally agree with that.
Okay. All right.
Tom's got his hand up first.
You gonna defer to Tom? You gonna
Well,
give,
he
are
had his hand up first.
you gonna yield to Tom?
He had his hand up first.
No, not often. Steve, I'm concerned about your ongoing concern about the people that have to put in IAs are situated most of the day at considerable distance from the estuaries that are getting the benefit. Can I ratchet you back decades ago to the acid rain controversy, where thousands of sulfur sources across the upper Midwest were forced to clean up their act because they were polluting the air that people throughout New England were having to breathe and live in, right? These people are polluting the groundwater, right? Is that acceptable?
Oh, I'm not saying it shouldn't be done,
Okay, a couple times you've referred to this thing about people being some distance
but
from.
it's not like they're a factory making widgets and putting some poison in the air or the rivers, and there's an economist term for this, I've forgotten, but
External costs.
external costs, thank you.
Yes,
On the rest of society. I mean, clearly that factory is doing something that most people don't do, like making tires. I've never made a tire in my
Yeah,
life, and you
right.
probably haven't either.
no. I've run a few.
And so it's reasonable that they bear the cost. They changed that from an external cost to an internalized cost to
Right.
their operation.
Right, you
So
pay more for a
The whole
tire.
market system takes it into account.
Yep.
And you figure out cleaner ways to make tires.
Or you send the work to China.
Right. And, but here, everybody's putting out nitrogen.
Right,
And I'm just saying that, so putting out the nitrogen isn't people can't change that other than by extracting the nitrogen after they
cleaning
put
it
it
up.
out, whether it be a UD or an IA or a sewer. And maybe I should think about this more carefully, but I just think that the people that benefit from it, which is the whole town, should pay for it. And by the way, I'm not in a nitrogen-sensitive area.
Well, that's what I
I'm a
was-
taxpayer, so I'm not arguing from
Right.
self-interest.
right, no, and I agree, and you and John Waterbury and I are all in direct discharge zones, so we're never gonna have to worry about being required to put in an advanced system.
Right.
And therefore, we shouldn't pay, because by the time our nitrogen gets to the salt water, it is so dilute and spread out that it's not gonna have a negative effect. This would, but the point is these people are polluting the environment by releasing nitrogen. Right? Anyway,
Yeah, and I hear you.
all right. Ed, dive in.
Well,
Stay dry.
what I'm hearing is, gosh, maybe we ought to look at expanding sewer capacity. Now, we've got a limited amount now with the land-based, and we're gonna have a limited amount with the outfall, but we won't have room for a heck of a lot more sewering, and maybe we're gonna need to or want to do more sewering. Therefore, should the outfall design be larger to not just have 300,000 in excess capacity over the existing plan in the comprehensive wastewater management plan, but 25, 50% higher than that? Instead of 2 million, should it be 3? And what does that do to the overall thing? Because
If we made that decision right now, you're adding several years to the outfall, because we'd go all the way back to modeling at different flows. We'd go all the way back to redoing everything with the USGS and, the Sagamore lens and everything else. That's a big change. That's a big change.
So everything is predicated on a 2 million gallon per day maximal output?
So when we started all this, we were working with the 1.7, okay? So we were working with 1.7, and it turns out that hydraulically, because the treatment plant's so high, you can get 2 MGD out without building a pump station,
Right.
okay?
I remember that.
That sort of was like, we were looking for 1.7. We put a pipe in the ground, we wind up with a little extra capacity at the end of the day. Keep in mind, watershed plans go out, and every 5 years, they have to get reviewed and assessed, and it's adaptive management. So over time, we can look at that, okay? But I would suggest that at this moment in time, trying to change the fundamental of the whole outfall equation and everything, which was started to resolve the groundwater discharge problem for the 1.7. We were having a real problem with the 1.7 number, where to discharge it, okay? So we've actually created a little bit of potential flexibility going forward.
But it's limited.
It's not infinitely limited, but to get to a higher number, now you're talking more treatment facilities, a pump station of some sort. Now, we will make sure when we put the directionally drilled portion in and the diffuser outfall portion in, that's going to be sized for what is a hypothetical, if you sewered a whole big area, a 4 MGD flow. We looked at 4 MGD when we did the hydrodynamic
Right, well, that's what I
modeling.
remember from some of the
We
original
looked at the
discussions.
hydrodynamic modeling, but just to determine if, it was kind of like a boundary condition. It was 4 going to like blow up on the most basic level of how things got mixed in the ocean. It did not. We haven't spent any time or energy or effort on any number greater than 2, but we also recognize that if we're going to spend several $1 million to directionally drill a pipe, the marginal difference in cost to go between a 16 and a 20 or a 24-inch pipe on a directional drilling is not a big number. You don't want to have to come back in 40 years or something and have to redirectionally drill that portion, okay? Because you could always put a pump station on the pipe that's in the ground and put more flow in it.
Yep, okay, so that is still not a fixed, hard, forever constraint. The potential is there, but it
I'm
would get
gonna
into.
be, I'm gonna be long dead and not have to deal with it.
I would too, because I think I'm older than you, actually, so
You're
that's
smarter than me
fine.
too, which I like. I like people that are older and smarter than me.
But,
I look up to you.
my point is, we shouldn't tie our hands too tightly
We're not.
because things change. And that's my point. And, I remember following a lot of the earlier discussions before I was on the committee and said, man, this outfall's a great idea. And there was talk of up to 4 and pipe diameters. So right now, all of the permitting, if I'm understanding this right, and correct me if I'm wrong, is predicated on the 2 million gallons per day max. To go higher would require doing that all over, but it would not require running another outfall pipe. The one that's there would have the capacity, the land-based would require pumping assist, but.
Could be configured.
Could be
configured.
Yeah, the potential is there. We're not just saying,
And the 4 is not a random number, so the town, on average, in the wintertime, pumps under 3 MGD of water to the homeowners. In the summers, those numbers run between 6 and 8. July 4th, it's 10 or 11, which those are unusual days. So the 4 number turned out to come back to it, the density map with all the little dots. Four would be a lot of sewering.
yeah, most of the town. Or good hunger.
Most of the town where there's a lot of homes, but
Yep.
that's pretty far out there.
Yeah, but, we shouldn't tie our hands too tightly is what I was saying, and we're not. And that's the answer I was
We're
hoping for.
trying to maintain some flexibility. Like I say, the ground-based discharge was, when we looked at it fairly detailed, we started to see some real limits on it. And we looked at the Augusta parcel, and we looked at help me out, what's the other one called? The Allen parcel. But, the more we looked at those 2 parcels, the more we were like, boy, do we go rip up the golf course and use that as well, okay? If we're gonna try to get to some outlying numbers and some redundancy, so. I'm babbling on. Who else wants to talk?
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was just going to say that the bright spot there is Jim Churchill's model, even at 4 million gallons per day, showed only a slight leakage of material out of the original discharge spot. They had, 100-meter
Yeah, the
Fractals around-
ocean side of it's fine. The
Yep.
Sagamore Lynn side's gonna become much more problematic.
Right, but anyway, I just say there was a bright spot at that end of things.
Yep, okay.
So, Steve,
One quick, oh,
Jonathan had his finger.
I was just going to say, what's the status of the Sagamore Lens modeling, and when will we see some
We'll
results?
get to that under reports of members and staff.
one quick thing, I just wanted to repeat.
We have time.
Yeah.
Because it's based on the great graphs, numbers that Kristen just put up there. Just a reminder, if you take, this is to support John's statement at the previous meeting about how this is a Manhattan project for Falmouth. 6,500 IAs, if you did one per day, including Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays, that's, if you finished one a day, all the contractors put together, that's 20 years.
Yeah, no problem. We'll get it done. All right? I'm going to move on to item 4, which is a pretty straightforward thing. Every year, we wind up authorizing the expenditure to cover the cost of the ScienceWare contract, which basically, it pays for Kristen's ability to answer any question that you can dream up, Steve. Okay? So I would accept a motion to
So moved.
authorize an expenditure. of
I'll
up to
second.
Okay? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
can we congratulate Kristen on the high quality and consistency of her output and her overall cheerful demeanor dealing with the grumpy old men of Falmouth?
Old stuffed shirts.
Oh, excuse me,
The old stuffed shirts, toss.
Right.
What do you need, Amy, beyond the vote? Just a copy of the vote?
Look at it. I haven't, it's not a contract renewal, this is just, because this is Article 17 funds that they control.
Yes, the amendment, well, let me talk to.
Yeah, between the two of you, look at them. If you need something other than the vote, let us know. Okay?
Well, I guess we're saying that things continue as usual, right? We're not proposing any changes.
No, there's a
In case
funding
some
source.
detail comes up,
There's a funding
if
source.
it's the same as before.
I just don't know if we have to go to the select.
Just
I don't
keep
know if we can
behaving.
vote or we have to go to the select,
Oh.
that's all, okay? All right, reports of members and staff. Amy, can I put you momentarily on the podium? You want to talk about the outfall and what you've been doing for the last 14 days? Because, you know, I've got a ton of emails from you that relate to the outfall, so you must be doing something.
There's a lot going on. We have there's a lot of permitting, there's been a lot of permitting effort for the marine borings, which I didn't realize was going to be quite so difficult ahead of time, but we're getting there. We have now made a third submittal to the Army Corps of Engineers for the permit for the marine borings, and we believe that is the final submittal, which then we are seeking confirmation tomorrow that will start their 60-day review timeframe for that, which if they move forward with that as we assume they will, we will do the marine borings in December of this year, which is right about when we plan to do it and would be terrific. There was another permit that we thought we might need, and we have ruled that out. So we're closing in on the marine boring work for this December, which will be terrific. And those will be, for anybody who's watching, that will be one boring on land in Kite Park and 6 borings in a line offshore from Kite Park up to 3,000 feet offshore, about every 500 feet.
How deep do they go?
100 feet.
Wow.
And it's a 6-inch diameter casing, and they push it down and auger up the soil and characterize the soil, and that information can be used for designing and costing out the outfall. That's the biggest thing. We had a good meeting with the USGS on their results so far. They have done they've done some preliminary modeling of the discharge scenario. What we had them model was not specifically any set sewer area that we've been contemplating. For simplicity's sake, we had them model sewering everything south of Route 28 that isn't already sewered, which we're not planning on doing, but it's just sort of a simplifying assumption. And then another scenario was sewering all of Falmouth. So as Steve likes to talk about bracketing scenarios, is that the term? Boundary conditions.
Yeah.
So, there's a sort of a slightly larger version of what we've been talking about doing to sewering the entire town. And they've given us preliminary results for that, which look good to us, but it doesn't matter what we think. In the end, what matters is what the water resources folks think.
So under the division, what's DCR?
That's not.
Resources, whatever.
Conservation and recreation.
Correct,
Yeah, I
whatever.
don't think that's.
There's the water, there's a group of people that monitor water and groundwater. And they're the folks that ultimately will have to say that we're not causing a problem. And so we've got preliminary results. They look very, very favorable. John sat in on this stuff. It's what we expected to see, but it's now based upon modeling and science. And we've reached out to the folks that we'll actually have to submit this to. There's a little bit of a chicken and the egg here in which the USGS has done this model, but internally they have some very strict scientific review, peer review protocols. And so they not reluctant. They won't release all of this until it's gone through a couple of months of this sort of internal review, and they get beat up over all the little nuances. But we have sort of worked our way to the point where they're willing to share what they've done with the folks from Water Resource, so they can look at it, because we have a budget. If the water resource people look at what's been done and say, yeah, but we'd like to know if this or this or this happened, we can then rerun the model another time. But a whole bunch of effort was spent calibrating it from when they calibrated, 14, 15 years ago? Last time they set this model up was a while ago.
2010.
Huh?
2010.
2010, yeah. So 14 years ago, they built this model, and things have happened and changed, and growth and different amount of water withdrawal in different places and different wastewater flows. So they spent a fair amount of time moving the model up to 2024. And then they ran a scenario, and we had a look-see at that.
So what I was getting at was, we need, as Steve is saying, the regulators that look at drinking water and aquifer condition to look at these preliminary results, tell us what they're thinking, and tell us what questions they have that we might be able to answer with another run of this scenario. So good progress there, and we'll be meeting with them we're meeting with them next week. Last thing is Interbasin Transfer Act. There's been there's a Interbasin Transfer Act prohibits regulates movement of water from one watershed, one large-scale watershed, to another. And we have gotten a determination that that is not applicable to our situation. So that's a terrific help as well. That's where we thought we were going to get, but we've gotten a definitive reply on that. So that's quite helpful.
All right, Matt?
I have a question for Amy.
Step up to the microphone so you get onto it. Sorry. We should get one of those portable microphones and pass it around,
Matthew Hanley, Thomas Landers Road. We're talking about the outfall pipe, but I have a question that's coming up. Amy, are we still looking at Springtown meeting for the next section of sewering?
Matt, she can answer, yes, we're going to Springtown meeting, yes.
Okay.
For construction money, yes.
Yeah. So is that going to be in your report before the end of the meeting, or can I ask my question?
I got 5 minutes to get everything out. I mean, we'll pick up the whole sewer next phase at some future meeting, because we have to talk about what we're going to ask for money.
Well, my question is, are we planning on expanding the
stick to the outfall?
Stick
to the outfall.
Well, the question is, outfall is you know, we're talking about things that are 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the road. What I'm saying is, we're talking about discharge capacity, like in this discussion that we had with, the presentation we just had. I'm saying, like, you know, you look at the nitrogen-sensitive watersheds, and all our ground-based discharge is in nitrogen-sensitive watersheds. The Allen parcel, the Augusta parcel, you know, the current discharge at beds 9 through 13. And then beds 14 and 15 are just outside the boundary. You know, it's, whatever happened to site 10? So site 7 was beds 14 and 15. Originally, the town was looking at beds 16 and 17.
I'm gonna stop you, but I'm gonna give you an answer very quickly.
Well, I was asking, my question is.
I'm gonna tell you this. We went to town meeting, we've talked about this before. There's a time frame between today, building the Tassa sewers, and the outfall. It's an interim period, and the flow from the Tassa sewers will go to the existing treatment plant and will go to the beds that are out there for a limited period of time, whether it's 3, 5, or 7 years till we have the outfall.
If the outfall gets approved.
Right now, I would say I'm feeling much more confident after the initial round on the USGS stuff that we saw in preliminary format. It's the one thing in my mind that had the ability to stop us from an outfall. And what I got on the preliminary tells me that we are on the right path and will not get shut down.
So when we're going to start the discussion on sewering before town meeting?
I'm sure we'll have a conversation around it, because we're just trying to get through fall town meeting. We haven't even looked at spring.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
I'll make sure you're here when we start talking about it.
Well, there's going to be a lot of required meetings by state mandates, like Conservation Commission has to be pulled in on all these stuff. So
Right.
that's why I'm asking these questions now. Is like, are the beds going to be expanded, or are they just going to be
Nope.
additional discharge?
Additional discharge.
Okay, that was going to be my question. That would have made things a lot easier.
Yep,
Thank
We're
you.
not expanding anything. All right. Any other reports of members and staff in the last 2 minutes? Steve?
The most recent meeting of the Urine Diversion Liaison Group was today, and the big news is that the same law that we were talking about that keeps us from spending money on IAs also keeps us from spending money on UDs, including in the pilot project. So, and even if that's brought up by a warrant that's entered by the Green Center or one entered by the town, which might have been in the spring. This is very disappointing, but it's life, and we're now looking for alternate funding sources.
Okay. All right. Tom?
Yes. Briefly, I've been attending the Falmouth Freshwater Ponds Advisory Committee meeting, and I want to report that I think they're making great progress. Of course, they're brand new, and they've got an amazing job ahead of them, but they're proceeding in a very focused and organized manner. They're establishing priority topics. They're establishing priority targets for people to go after to try to get things done. And I see Kim here nodding his head. He's been a driving force behind this committee, and it's going quite well.
So
I'd give them.
I would like to suggest, Kim, that when you feel comfortable with where your committee's going, and you'd like to come before this committee, whether it's a joint meeting or whatever, to talk about what you're looking at, what you're doing, and where the intersections are, we can fit you on the agenda, okay?
Yeah, and maybe Steve Stovall, the chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, just take that back. That, you know, when you get to a certain point, obviously, we don't want to work in separate silos. We want to work together, okay?
What we need is, we need Kristen to be cloned, and we need money.
There you go. All right.
We've
30
tried
seconds, 30 seconds. We got minutes.
No, I'm just going to say, we've tried to clone her several times, and it's.
We got 30 seconds.
It's
And
failed.
does anybody have any comments on the minutes? If not, I'll accept the motion to accept them as written.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, I have a motion to accept the minutes as written. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, we've got 15 seconds. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All right, all those in favor
Yes.
signify by saying aye, aye.
Aye.
Just do
Thank
it.
you, everybody. We got through a lot tonight.
So